So now let's start exploring sensory physiology. It tries to understand how our senses work. We think that this is very important, right? Because everything that we experience in the outside world, we do it through our senses. And we think it's just fascinating how many different types of information we can perceive. And interestingly, our bodies evolved very specialized organs for all these types of information and all kinds of biological tricks that our body uses. And we will talk about some of them. So let's just remind ourselves, how many senses do we have? 5. Can you name them again for me? Vision, touch, taste, smell, and one more? One more? Hearing. Great job. Yes, indeed, there are 5 main senses, and here they're represented by these specialized organs that we use. But before we move further, I still want to just really find out something. Do you maybe know more than 5 senses? Anyone? Do you maybe think there is more? Yeah, what about the 6th sense? Yeah, Arya.
I just think there is more than 5 senses. I don't really know what the 6th sense might be, but
Okay, well.
In like hearing or conscious, there might be like some sort of 6th sense.
Interesting. Okay, is anyone else convinced that there are 5 or more? Who thinks there are more? Raise your hands. Okay, well, you're not as, I was expecting that you will not believe me, because I wanted to tell you about one secret of mine, because I actually have the 6th sense. But it's a secret, no one can know, I don't want any problems. Do you believe me? Who believes me? Raise your hands. No one believes in me. Okay. Okay, yes, thank you very much. That's great. But but one is good, but one is not enough. I won't give up as easily. I will actually try to convince you that I do have the 6th sense, okay? Of course, it might be not as exciting on this picture, but we'll see. And actually, I will try to convince that all of you also have more than 5 senses, okay? And to do that, we will just do we can call it an experiment, just a very little thing. So what I would like you to do is, let's raise our finger, and then I will ask you to close your eyes. And then on the count of 3, I will ask you to bring the tip of your finger to the tip of your nose. Quickly, but gently, don't poke yourself in the eyes. And let's see what happens. And then if you can hit the spot, let's scream something. Like maybe, how about King in the North? Do you watch Game of Thrones? No? No one? No one is watching Game of Thrones? Okay, let's just then scream bingo or something, okay? Okay, on the count of 3, okay, let's close our eyes, and 1, 2, 3, bingo! Okay, now we can open our eyes, and let's check what happened. Do you think you were able to do that? I think everyone is pretty good. Okay, and that's all the experiment. Right? Yeah, it was pretty simple, but now let's think about it. What happened? We couldn't see our finger, we couldn't hear it, yet we were able to do this complex movement. So how are we able to do that? Well, actually, it turns out that our bodies have the ability to sense the relative position of different body parts in space, and also to sense the angle, direction, and speed of movement. And that's why we humans, we can perform very complex movements, and even without watching or hearing. But of course, I was cheating a little bit. No one calls that the 6th sense. But there is a scientific name for this. It's called proprioception. Maybe you've heard this word, but it comes from the ancient Greek proprio, meaning sensing your own self. So I just want you to be aware that there are more than 5. So maybe now that you've heard that, maybe you can still come up with some other special senses. These are called special senses. Who likes roller coasters? Oh, many people. So do you think you can feel something when the roller coaster goes down? Can you feel the acceleration? Right? Okay, so that's one other type. Then what about, let's say you were upside down. Can you tell if you're upside down or standing normally, right? So we also have a sense of equilibrium. And then in the animal kingdom, there are actually even stranger things are happening. Some weird animals can sense magnetic fields, electric fields, ultrasound. So again, just so that you know, there are more than 5 main senses, but these are actually 5 main ones, and we will be talking mostly about them. And today we will start with one of them, which is the sense of touch. But the scientific name for the sense of touch is actually somatosensation. It's a slightly broader term. Again, from ancient Greek, it means sensing by your body. Somato means body. And it's primarily, we're referring to sensing by your skin. And this is a broader term because we can not only sense touch, but we can also sense things like pressure, vibration, warm and cold temperature, and pain. And this is one of the things that we are doing in our lab. We are trying to understand how this works. We're trying to understand better how it works. And we are trying to learn new stuff about it. But before we can learn new stuff, we must follow the advice of this guy. Do you know about Sir Isaac Newton? Have you heard? The apple, gravity. Right. And he said, if I have seen further than others, it is by standing upon the shoulders of giants. So obviously what he meant is that before we can learn new knowledge, we first must learn everything that came before us, what is already discovered. And this is actually a big part of being a scientist, is trying to learn everything there is to know about some narrow topic. So let's try to review what is already known about sensing touch, and we will use this situation as an example. Let's say we are touching something very hot, we feel burning pain. How does that happen? First, let's talk about what parts of the body are involved. And parts of the body are organized into physiological systems. So which physiological system is the most important for this process? What do you think? And I have some hints for you. So there is, for example, skeletal system, muscular system, nervous system, digestive system. Nervous, great job. Okay, yes, that's totally correct. Of course, nervous system does that because it is specialized for receiving, processing, and transmitting information. So it basically deals with information. And nervous system, it consists of peripheral nervous system, which includes nerves. Nerves go everywhere in our body. And then they carry the signal back to the central nervous system, which is our brain, where we get this conscious perception of touching something. But this is a big level. This is a macro level. What if we zoom in on the nervous system to the microscopic level? What is it made of, the nervous system? Can you say it louder? Nerves. Okay, but what are nerves made of, even if we zoom even more? All the tissues of our body are made of cells. And how are the cells of the nervous system called? Neurons. Great job. Yes, neurons. So nervous system is made of neurons. Neurons are these very weird-looking cells which have a small body, a lot of short processes, and then one long process called axon, which can be like several feet long. There are many types of neurons. Obviously, most of them are in the brain, but some of them, some special neurons called sensory neurons, are located not in the brain, but let's look at this other schematic of the human body. And here's our sensory neuron. So they're located in special structures called ganglia near the spinal cord. And then they send their processes, this long axon, all the way everywhere in your body, and they end up in your skin. They form webs around hair follicles, or they form these corpuscles in the skin, or they form free nerve endings in the skin. And here they're in a great position to sense stimuli like heat. And then they carry the signal back towards the spinal cord to another neuron and up to the brain. So that's the structure of the sensory pathways. But how do they work? What is the nature of this signal that is carried along the axon? The neurons have special property. They're unlike other cells. They can generate something. They can generate one interesting thing. I will give you a hint here. What am I trying? I'm looking for one keyword here. What am I trying to say with this slide? Yes, Arya. Can you say it louder? Electricity, right. You probably heard it. Neurons operate on electricity. They're electrically active cells. In fact, they're like little batteries, because the way batteries work, they separate electric charges and store this electric charge. In a very similar way, neurons can also separate positive and negative ions. And then when the neuron encounters some stimulus, such as warm temperature, these positively charged ions will flow inside the cell, inside the neuron, and then they will just keep flowing along the axon. And as we know from physics, the flow of charged particles is electricity. It is electric current. But in the case of neurons, we actually there is a special word for this electricity. We call it action potential. Have you heard this word before? It's a central concept of neuroscience. Action potentials. It's the electricity that is flowing in the neuron. And we can even measure all these things. In a similar way how we can measure voltage across a battery, in a very similar way we can measure voltage across the membrane of a neuron. It is of course much smaller, but it is there.
And now Lydia is measuring action potentials every day.
Right now, I think she will, when we are done, she will go measure electrical signals. So all this was described very well now, and it is very well known. But an interesting thing about science, that doing science is a lot like playing with these things. Do you know what these are? Russian nesting dolls, right? Have you seen them? Like in real? Okay, so can you describe what happens when you play with them? Adara, can you tell us what?
Well, basically, they come in different sizes, but all of them can fit if they're slightly larger one, and they can all fit in a bigger one.
Yeah, so the point is that, you open one, and there is another one just like that. And you're curious what's inside. You open another one, and there is another one. So that's how we approach science. We discover one thing, but we're immediately interested, okay, but what's in there? What's happening on the deeper level? Right? So the science is endless. There is no end to it. You can study it forever. And that's a great thing. There will be always something to do. So after this was discovered, now scientists were interested, how is it possible that this positively charged ion gets inside the cell? And to show this, I will use a slightly different schematic here. So again, we have our skin, and this is the nerve ending, or the terminal of the neuron. And if we zoom in on its border, we will find a membrane, which the ions cannot go through normally. But this membrane also contains proteins called ion channels. They're called channels because they actually have like a hole in them. But it is usually closed. At resting state, it is closed by the gate. So it's not activated. But when a neuron encounters some stimulus, such as hot temperature, the gate opens, and now the ions can flow inside the cell. That's how we get electricity inside the neuron. Okay, now remember the nesting dolls, but still, now scientists are interested, what is the nature of this molecule? And about 15 years ago, probably around the time you were born, a human genome project was completed. Have you heard about the Human Genome Project? Right, it was a huge achievement for all science, a very big collaborative effort, but it resulted in deciphering the whole sequence of letters in our genetic code. And we learned that humans have 22,000 around genes, and each of those genes can produce a protein. And everything that our body does is done by proteins, every little function. So now, one of the central questions of all biomedical science is, which protein does what out of those 22,000 genes? And this is very important because when we know which protein does what, we can design drugs to target this protein. So this will be a very important task for science going forward. And scientists work on that, and they were actually able to identify some of these ion channels that are involved in sensing touch. For example, there is a protein or a gene called TRPV1. Scientists are not very good at giving names to stuff, so it's really confusing, but that's how it's called, TRPV1. And this interesting protein, it can open or get activated when it is exposed to very high burning temperature. And scientists think that it transmits, along all those pathways that we just talked about, that it transmits this information to the brain and creates a burning sensation. And there is another interesting channel called TRPM8, which opens when it experiences cold temperature. And again, scientists think that it transmits the information about cooling sensation to our brain. So this is a big achievement because now we can study these proteins and design drugs for them. But finally, I just want to share one other interesting, very peculiar property of these proteins. They're not only located in the skin, as we were discussing here, they're also located in your mouth, on your tongue. And they can be activated not only by temperature, but also by some chemicals found in plants and food products. And this is a very peculiar trick of nature, basically, because when you eat some of these products, they will open these channels and trick your body into sensing temperature even when there is no temperature present. So it's like nature playing a prank on you, because you get an illusion of temperature. And you're probably familiar that some foods create these sensations. But now I want us to play a game. We will give you some of these foods, and I would like you to listen carefully to your sensations and tell me which of these foods activates which of these channels. And again, I hope you understood the idea that by opening them we can create these sensations.